2022 season ender. In race 1, Gagne showed up and showed out. The net result, 13 points in his pocket. But race 2, dark clouds and raindrops. Perfect for Petrucci, who stands up and takes a win. After that, it's now 4. So here we are, only 2 races remain. Begging the question, can the number 1 extend, or will the 9 muster the speed to climb over Gagne and take the top spot? We find out right now. It's the finale at Barber Motorsports Park right here in Birmingham, Alabama, as the stage is being set for Medallia Superbike race number 1 of 2 on the believable sites here at Barber Motorsports Park. Welcome to the broadcast. Welcome to the broadcast booth. I'm Greg White, standing alongside 2-time world champ Jason Pridmore. Now, Jason, I mean, we could talk about a bunch of stories in Medallia Superbike, but what it comes down to is there's only 4 points that separate 1 from 2, and a championship needs to be decided this weekend.
Yeah. Talk about big picture. We talk about championship points. What support role do you offer to Jake today?
Yeah, like you said, there's a big picture, this championship means a lot to everybody. So I think we've been thinking about it a little bit too much. It seems like we're all in a pretty good position and in a good spot. So I think the main thing is just to put our head down, go race like we have been all year, and I think everything will figure it out. But
at the starting grid for Medallia Superbike Race 1, it was Gagne, new track record, a 122 flat.
Yeah, Cam Peterson and Matthew Skoltz also there on the front row. PJ continuing to ride well. Petrucci, you see there in the middle of row 2 next to Escalante as well. Lewis Gillum, Kyle Wyman on the 3rd Tytler's bike this weekend. Hector Barbara, Dave Anthony, and Ashton Yates starting outside of row 4. Then we have Corey Alexander, Max Flitters, Travis Wyman, Jeff May, Ezra Bovier, Andrew Lee. A little further back, Posh, Lewis, Giannotto. Nice to see Joe back on a BMW. And then Hunter Dunham, Lampkin, Isaiah Davis as well. And on the last row there, Greg, we got Coffee and Waters.
From qualifier to the race. Clutches are out, we're going racing, and it looked like a good launch from all 3 on the front row. Jake Gagne was the closest one there. He'll take us off into turn number 1. So it's 1, 2, 3 for Yamaha at the moment.
And Petrucci slots himself by.
What's up, everybody? And we are live, Florida Moto Talk. We're back again in this awesome podcast we put together where we talk about just motorcycles in general, motorcycle racing. We talk about used bike deals. We talk about track days. We talk about advancing from the novice group to the intermediate group. If you missed that video that we dropped yesterday. And we're starting to work on doing a couple new things. And we have something very new for you today, something that we're very extremely excited about. We have a special guest, a very special guest. Isn't that right, Tristan?
Yeah. We found ourselves a pro racer, and we've both known him for a while now. I mean, it just came up in my Facebook memories that I've known Joe for 14 years. So, oh crap, I dropped his name. There's a lot of Joes in racing. It's not Joe Roberts, I can tell you that much. But
oh yeah,
let's bring him in.
Yeah, let's bring this guy in. See what we got.
Hopefully with less technical difficulties.
And real quick before we bring him on, just want to give a quick shout out to 77 Decals. They're a friend of the channel, and over at 77 Decals, they offer custom decal kits for Groms and all sorts of mini bikes. The kits are crazy good. They're crazy unique. They have pre-made kits, and they also have custom kits. You can call in and tell them exactly what you want, and they can give you something completely unique to your bike. But if you're interested in getting decals, 77decals.com, friend of the channel, and they do really great work. But without further ado, let's bring our guest on. And we're going to see who was actually able
Definitely
to
not
actually
Joe Roberts.
guess. Not Joe Roberts. Not Joe Roberts, man. How many hearts dropped? I mean,
that's what we should have changed the thing to.
Hey, we're
Joe
happy.
Roberts.
Yeah. Joe ... Giannotto, Joe Giannotto. If anybody's heard of this guy, and hopefully you have, because he's out there doing his thing in MotoAmerica.
Pro racer, very loosely.
Yeah, pro racer, man, doing your thing. How you feeling today, man?
Good, man. Had a productive day at work. Got a lot of stuff in, and hopefully when I get off here, I'll get in some time on a pedal bike. Race season's
Always
coming
hustling.
very soon.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have some questions about that pedal bike too. But before we hop into that, uh, I met Joe a couple years ago, like during the COVID time, where there was everything was shut down, and me and some buddies were trying to get together to do a track day, and Jennings was pretty much the only track that we could find. So we got up with Jennings and we set up a private track day, and they were only allowing 8 to 9 people on track. So we only had a couple people. We needed a couple more, so we went and posted up on the forums, and sure enough, some guy named Joseph Giannotto responded, and Paige showed up at the track day late and everything, and guy rolls up, big trailer. We're all on track. He rolls out this sweet freaking ZX10 and then just hops on track. And when this guy starts spinning laps, it's like the craziest thing I'd ever seen at that point, because this was a couple years ago, and me and my buddies, we were all just regular track day guys, man. We didn't know any racers or anything like that. And sure enough, Mr. Giannotto over here just whips out his ZX10 Superbike and just starts just dogging that thing out around Jennings. Just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen on the track.
It was yeah, that was a really weird time. Like everything was down, none of the club racing stuff was going on. We were on a pause. I think MotoAmerica was getting ready to have their first round at Wisconsin. Like I want to say it was the first thing in like the shutdown world to actually
Mhm.
be like road racing again.
Yeah.
There were no fans. Anyway, the bike, Superbike, it was literally a brand new to me ZX10, just basic package stuff. Trying to put the bike together at the start of that season, I was still missing the cartridge kit when I had gone to the test at Barber like a month or 2 months prior to that. And I had finally gotten the cartridge kit like after everything was closed and shut down. So somebody had actually tagged me in your post for the track day. And I really wanted to get out and just turn some laps on the actual front end I would be racing on. And yeah, it was kind of funny, like to see such few people at Jennings, and it was fun, clean laps. You gotta go on Mondays now. That's figured out. Is you go on Mondays and you get really clean track.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Mondays are the perfect day for sure. But a private track day, you pretty much got to test and tune with the brand new setup, right? So couldn't have been a better
I,
situation,
I
right?
kind of timed it where like you like the group would kind of go out and you guys would start putting laps in and putting laps in, and like once you guys would start to kind of file back off, I'd be like, all right, like I'm gonna cruise out now because like I knew I wouldn't buzz anybody, and like it was probably like the third or fourth session. I think it may have been you. Well, I'm trying to remember the older gentleman's name. He was a mechanic for I want to say like a Ducati dealer in Pensacola.
Oh, that's Ted.
One if not both of you came down and you were like, "Hey man, do you know what kind of times you're throwing down out there?" And I was like, I didn't have a lap timer, and somebody was like, like you're floating around like 18s, 19s, and I was like, oh, okay, like that's some good feedback. Like I wasn't sure how it was actually going to work out with the new front end and stuff. And yeah, it was a nice little refresher for heading up to Wisconsin for that round.
Yeah, that's insane. I'm just trying to picture like doing 18s. You're truly a madman. Absolute maniac.
Yeah,
But
it's
I'm
yeah,
just trying to wrap my head around riding a leader bike around Jennings.
and making it go that fast.
you know when I first started and I raced on a 600, I always thought that the big bike guys had it easy. Like I thought the additional power would just make it oh so much easier to go out and turn out laps. And it wasn't until I actually got my own and realized how much differently the bike needs to be ridden compared to a
Yeah.
600.
Yeah.
Like they don't like turning. Like, it is a process to get it to turn. Back to the tire test. I go to the MotoAmerica tire test again on a stock Fork ZX10 just to kind of feel it out. I'd never really been on track with like the legit pros. And that, like, you go out on track and run a clock. Sometimes it doesn't really let you know how you're stacking against guys that actually know what they're doing. Like, when I first started to ride, I oftentimes was trying to carry way too much corner speed, spending way too much time on the side of the tire. And big bike with more weight and more power, the more time you spend on the side of the tire, the quicker it burns through that side of the tire.
Yeah.
I remember in one of the sessions going into the museum corner at Barber, Tony Elias had just passed me. And it was like, all right, like, I'm going to latch onto the back of him and try to follow him. We go into the museum corner.
Crazy.
And he starts to eat, and I start closing in on him. And I was like, holy cow, I can't believe like I'm closing this fast on him. And then closing turns into, I think I'm about to rail into Tony Elias because he literally just like parks the bike, but then he turns it and just takes off. And it was just like, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm like hook in the front, trying to gather the thing back up, sitting on the edge of the tire as it takes this super long arc out onto the straightaway. While he jumps 300 or 400 yards ahead because he picked the bike up where he could just hammer it and go. And it was just like, all right, that's lesson one. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and lesson 2 is don't run
when
into
you
Tony
guys-
Elias.
Yeah. That should probably be rule 1. Don't run it anyone that knows what they're doing.
And that
So.
man, that's like the meat and potatoes, but I feel like we skipped a couple steps. So let's so we know where Joe Giannotto's at now, right? We know where you're at now. MotoAmerica Superbike rider, racer, number 48, Limitless Racing, on track with the big boys, right? Doing your thing. But let's back it up a little bit, right? Like, how did you get started in, riding motorcycles and track day riding? Like, what was sort of your progression, and how did you get from point A to point B?
It was all totally by mistake. Lots of my family members have always had motorcycles, whether it be like dirt bikes or street going bikes, but I never really like had dirt bikes growing up. And when I was younger, I knew I was really stupid, so I didn't trust myself to get a motorcycle. And I think I was like 22, and a bunch of my friends that lived down in Orlando, we actually just went to do the MSF course, Motorcycle Safety Foundation course, to like get your license, as kind of a just fun haha for a weekend. Like, it was like a night or something during the week, and then over the course of the weekend, you would go out and do like the parking lot training stuff. And I was horrible at it. Their roommate was kind of into bikes, so I think that's what kind of planted the seed for them. And then I got the invite to come down and do it with them. And when we went down to do it, I got to watch the Faster and Faster documentaries. It was on like Valentino Rossi, when MotoGP, when it actually went from like 500cc GP to MotoGP 4-stroke, like just that whole thing. And it just really, really stuck. It was like, that is super cool stuff. So then after I did the course, I really wanted to go get a bike, and I went and bought a like 20,000+ mile. Let me back up. I was a Honda mechanic. I actually worked for a Honda dealership, car dealership. So of course I'm gonna get a Honda motorcycle. So I bought a crazy high mileage Honda motorcycle as my first street bike, and went out with a buddy of mine who had kind of had a street bike for a little while, and he would sneak us into gated communities that no one lived in yet, and we would roll through kind of like they were a circuit. He would drop me off. I would sit and think about how it's wild that the guys on TV do the stuff that they do on TV and how I could never ride a motorcycle in that way. And I'm secretly incredibly competitive. So I started to read a lot of books on just like riding techniques, total control, twist of the wrist, like just tried to read them to understand the dynamics of like how do you really make a motorcycle do what you want it to do. And a lot of things started there.
Sweet. And so how old were you when you had that first bike?
23. I think I bought it like a month after my birthday.
Sweet.
So I was not somebody who grew up around it or like it was very foreign to me even at the age of 23. Like to be 23
Sweet.
and then go road racing seems silly.
Man,
It seems to have
so
worked out okay for you.
yeah, so what about maybe
Uh,
13, 15 years of like riding something like that from
I
street
think I
guy to
only
pro?
rode on the street for uh maybe a year and a half. I bumped into a guy at like the local bike shop. So I did not come from a household of technology. Like we didn't have a computer until after I had graduated high school. So like it wasn't like, oh, I'll go on the internet and find parts. Like I had to go down to the motorcycle dealer to get stuff. And I bumped into some dude and we were chatting. He was like, oh, have you ever done a track day? And I was like, the hell's a track day? And he's like, oh, there's this place Jennings here in Florida. And I was like, you don't have to have like a race license. They just let you go on a racetrack. And he was like, yeah. So I had to like go to a buddy's house and type in Jennings, and I started looking it up, and it was just like, I want to go try this. So I started saving up money to buy a set of leathers, bought a pair of boots that wound up being like, this is on like eBay, bought a set of boots that were probably 2 sizes too big that I had to wear 2 pairs of socks just so they like fit okay-ish.
Yep.
And this is kind of cool. So kind of like nobody rode competitively. Just my dad always had a street bike. I actually got my dad to come do my first track day and his first track day together. So it was the 2 of us, and it was kind of cool to maybe get up on him a little bit by the end of it.
Yeah, that's so crazy. So now I'm wondering, how long were you track riding before you decided to become a club racer?
So I did my first track day, and by lunchtime, I got pulled aside from one of the coaches. Like I thought I was going to get yelled at because the rule was like no passing on the inside. So I was just passing everybody around the outside on this old turd of a bike. And they were like, you need to go to the tower. You don't need to be in this group. You need to go to the next group. So I thought I was awesome and went and got bumped up to intermediate and
Nice.
went out on that track. And like, not knowing there were bikes out there that I would have told you were race bikes because they had fiberglass bodywork on them. It was probably rattle canned. They were probably just as crappy underneath as my bike, but to me, it looked like race bikes. So I'm out there trying to follow these guys, and I'm on street tires, and I have no idea what kind of times I was doing. Like that wasn't even on the radar. Like, oh yeah, you're supposed to like, that's something you do with racetrack is run a clock. But
Yeah.
I remember I was following a guy for like 2 or 3 laps, and I think I overheated the tires. I came through turn 2, and the front and rear together were just like, we're not doing this anymore. And the bike just started to drift wide. And they like in my head, it was like they said we could ride it off. So I snapped it up and went right into the grass, and immediately went to the rear brake, and the bike like snapped sideways. And I was like, oh, this is not going to work. And then I realized I was like, oh, I got to go. And I went and got and in the riders, if you go into the grass, tap the rear brakes. I was like, no, tap, 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 tap. So I started tapping it, and like I slowed the bike down, and I didn't crash it. And I remember coming in from that session, and I was just like, what the fuck was that? Like, I cannot believe I just got away with that. Where could you go get away with something like that on the street? Like, it was just a total bonehead move that I was probably doing every bit of 70 or 80 miles an hour, and took a motorcycle into the grass and rode it out. It was like, all right, like this is what I want to do. I went home, and my girlfriend at the time, I told her, I was like, I think I want to race. And in talking to her about it, a coworker of hers boyfriend also did track days. And like later on, she had mentioned to me, she's like, well, so and so said if you can't get to such and such lap time, like don't even bother. And I was like, I don't even know what I was doing. So I signed up for a second track day, and I went back out for a second track day. And I want to say they said like sub 130s. And I went back and I met some dude, and I was like, hey man, this is a weird question. Like, would you mind putting a stopwatch on me? Like, I'm just curious. And I was doing blistering 127s. And it was screw that guy. I'm well under that 130. I can go racing. So I did two track days, and then I signed up for a Weir race school.
All right, just like that.
No messing around.
The kind of sort of funny thing, like, you think you're gonna go racing, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but like I went through the rule book, and I mean like read the different class rules, read like the procedures. So like I'm expecting to go to a race school that's gonna be like wildly intense, and like you're gonna have to know all of these details.
Mm-hmm.
You ever do like an online driver improvement test, and then you get to the end and you go to, it's like click this box, and it like opens up the box with the answer in it?
Yeah.
That may have been what it was like in the end. I was a little surprised at how, I got a race license was like, I feel like everyone in here should know so much more than they know.
Yeah, I've heard that. And basically, it's just don't fall off during the day on the track, and be present in the classroom, and you're good.
Pretty much.
And be
It's like,
safe. So
go fast, don't fall down, don't run into each other, and have fun. And
and
for the most part, know what the flags are.
sweet. And
So,
that was on the
that's
F4I too?
Yes, that was on the F4I.
Sweet.
Big, wide pig.
And so while you were doing that, were you just like primarily doing club racing at that point, or were you doing track days too, or what was kind of
No,
the
like
split between
I
the two?
literally did the 2 track days, and then just started racing Wira. The first weekend, I don't know, it was a mix. Like, I sucked at hearing the calls. Like, there was the aspect of figuring out what races I signed up for, listening to like, race numbers such and such getting called. Like, I never like missed a race here and there, but kind of right off the rip, like I was getting a couple like second and third places as a novice, which like the bar just wasn't that high. I think at the time it was primarily Jennings, Roebling, like one road Atlanta round. So the only place I had ridden was Jennings. We went to Savannah for the first time. I didn't even have like spare wheels. Like I just had a motorcycle and a set of wheels. So like lunchtime, that was the other thing. Like I was racing on a budget, and I think Sportbike Track Gear at the time had a buy 1 front and 3 rears for like this package deal, and I was like, bought like $1,200 worth of tires just to have like, this is enough to get me through for a while. And I would literally spoon my tires on and off the rims at lunchtime. I would do practice on like an old set of tires, come in,
Yeah.
Harbor Freight bead breaker. I didn't really have money to pay the tire guy to like swap tires around. So I just changed my own tires before the races.
Sweet.
First time going to Savannah was also my first wet race. And I had to make like a last minute decision, like was just getting the tires back on the bike before they like started calling the races, and immediately went out and what was the dude's name? Brett Bolton, I think was his name. He was on like a current gen ZX6 at the time. And me and this kid in the rain, we're just going like back and forth, back and forth. He would smoke me down the front straightaway. I'd get back by him on the infield, and like, again, we're novice. It's all perspective. We think we're flying, and in my head, I'm just like, yeah, this is that stuff those guys do on TV. And I had my first time that the bike actually like snapped on me. It was like an almost high side that I recovered. And in hindsight, like I probably could have just turned it and made the rest of the arc, but I spooked, stood it up, rode it off the side of the track, fell over. My shoulder felt weird. I got up and came in. The medics checked me out. They're like, yeah, you're good. And then when I got back to the pit and started to relax, my collarbone was just like, and it was just like, welcome to racing. And it was like, everyone's like, oh yeah, like I've broken that like 4 times. And it was like, my brain didn't make the connection of like bodily harm in doing this. And it was like, oh shit, like this is something I got to worry about now.
Yeah.
So
that's why you were so
real.
fast. Yeah, that's why you were so fast, man. You just had no fear. And probably still don't have any. Despite that.
No, like I know like we had kind of chatted about like some of the questions, and like to go from being, you know, a track day guy to a novice racer to, you know, an expert club racer, and like just making those progressions, like the reality is you slowly turn yourself into a sociopath in regards to riding a motorcycle. You know, like I still feel that level of panic and fear, but it just has to be a crazy, crazy event for it to happen. Whereas like when I first started riding, the moment the bike would move at all, it would just send off alarms in my brain. And you just brush against it and brush against it and brush against it, and it just, that limit gets further and further and further out.
Cool.
I think to be any good at riding a motorcycle at speed, especially at your levels of speed, you got to have a pretty short-term memory. If you have a moment and you're still thinking about it 30 seconds later, then you're going to have another moment. So you kind of just, as soon as it happens, it's over, it's done, move on.
That is like literally the best way to describe it. Like, acknowledge what happened, maybe as to why it happened. Like, was that tire? Was it a thing? But if you're still thinking about it 5 or 6 corners later, that's brain capacity that could be doing other things.
Yeah.
And now I'm wondering, so just real quick, so how long were you a novice racer before you bumped up to expert?
So I had to sit out the rest of that season. The following year, I had gotten my first like modern bike. It was so in 2010, that was
You
my
had the
first
CBR
like, full
600.
novice season. Yeah, I got an 07 600 RR, which was pretty much the current platform. And what was crazy to me was I got down to 123s at Jennings on a 40,000 mile F4i because of how goofy my head was from the crash. I went back on a 600 RR and could only manage 25s. And I had nothing to, you know, like it was a much better platform, much better piece of equipment, but just the mental aspect, I was that timid and that worried and that scared that I suffered that much on track. And knowing that, I basically would collect piles of takeoffs, and I would go to Jennings on track day weekends in between race weekends, and I would make myself ride on really not awesome tires just to like desensitize myself to it. Later on, I definitely figured out a better way to kind of do that that's a little bit safer. So my first full novice year, I had a buddy that ran kind of like a little endurance team, and I would usually go over and kind of help them out in the pits. And there was this, I'll call him guy. Realistically, he was a kid. He was a couple years younger than me, but he was fast as can be. His name was Daniel Parkinson. I would watch this dude go out. We were at Barber, and you would just see the bike kicking, bucking, sliding, just 29s, 30s, 29s, 30s. He'd come in, make a couple complaints, go back out, just 29s, 30s, 29s, 30s. And it's just like, I want to know what that guy knows. And anytime he would be in the pits, I would kind of like try to pick his brain. And he probably gave me the best advice anyone had ever given me. And he said, go get a dirt bike. He's like, not a full-size one, but one that has a clutch a little bit smaller. And he's like, go out in the woods and you're going to crash the shit out of yourself. And he's like, when you get good at that, put a slick on the rear and go out in the woods. And then when you get good at that, put a slick on the front and go out in the woods. So at the end of my novice season, I was looking at one of the like dirt track schools, like, you know, I'm going to go learn dirt track stuff. And it was like $600 to go do that. It was like, you only get to do it for like 1 or 2 days. Or I could go on Craigslist and go pick up a 96 CR80. I didn't know the difference between 2-stroke and 4-stroke at the time. And I could buy my own dirt bike and practice in the backyard for a while before I actually go spend money to go to a school to basically just learn how to ride a dirt bike, as opposed to kind of knowing and then getting some instruction to kind of like speed it along. But yeah, I want to say maybe 2 months into having that dirt bike, I didn't feel like doing the rear and then the front where I didn't fall on the dirt tires. And I put a 125 GP slick on the front and a scooter tire on the rear. And I would basically go ride single track on a 2-stroke 80 in the woods. And to me, that it made the throttle your friend. It made you figure out how you can have the bike sliding, but also not fall over on its side. Like, that was probably one of the best tools that I ever had, and throttle control, because nothing has throttle response like an 80 or just a, going from an 80 cc 2-stroke to a 250. I thought the 250 was going to be insane. It was fast, but it wasn't a light switch where like the 250 is a nice linear power band. The 80 would just be like nothing, here's everything. Mm-hmm. So it would put you on the ground really fast if you weren't super controlled with it, where you'd get on it and then before it came on, have to back out of it. That was probably hands down the best training tool I ever had.
Oh, so
well, you're going to be super unpopular with my wife, because I've been saying I don't have any interest in dirt bikes because they're dangerous. And now you've just said that. And all of a sudden it's like, you know, I think I might need a dirt bike.
But now on the other side of that, I will not go ride motocross, because I swear to you, every time I go to the motocross track, I eat it so bad. Like, not confirmed broken ribs, but like 2 months later, roll over the wrong way in bed and breathe the wrong way, and it'll wake me up in the middle of the night. Like, I cannot jump things through the air. Like, it's not within my capacity. Out in the woods where you can kind of just like slide around and goof off, like, I really, really enjoy that. But motocross, it's just, I don't have it, man.
Yeah, professional motocross riders I think they're just a little bit more psycho than superbike racers, like maybe by just a very thin margin.
Physically, mentally, like, I hands down think those boys are the baddest athletes on the face of the planet. I mean, I like on a road race bike, one of the reasons I enjoy the Superbike races versus all of the other races is because of the duration. Fitness comes into play, mental ability, like to still be calculating, have your brain working well at the end of the race. Like, it's very grueling to do a race that long. I go to a motocross track, 2 laps in, I almost can't hold on anymore. Like, just physically destroyed. That's probably also like horrible technique, but like they just make it look so effortless, and I know that it's so hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love
So that
watching.
actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
that was actually kind of one of our questions, is what made you decide to go into the big bikes, the superbike class and stuff. You know, because from the outside we can see the budget for the top competitive teams in those classes is like astronomical. So it seems almost
Right.
counterintuitive that a budget racer would want to go into that class, but you kind of touched on it there, that the race duration is part of it.
I guess like in regards to that question, why that class? There's a multitude of different reasons. Um, I'm not a big guy, but me on a 600 in that paddock, I am one of the bigger guys.
Yeah.
Not saying that's directly a negative, but when there's a guy that's 20 or 30 pounds less than me on a factory bike versus my built on my kitchen counter bike, even if we had the same horsepower, the weight difference, it stands. Um, I got I was pretty content the last year that I raced 600s, and it was either time to get a newer 600, or at the time stock 1000. It looked like I could maybe enter into that class, and with who was competing at the time, I was kind of hoping to pull some top 5 finishes and win some money through Kawasaki. That year when I took the tire test, and PJ Jacobson was in the class, Cameron Peterson was in the class. It was kind of like a, oh shit! Like, I thought this was supposed to be like a beginner, like 1000cc class. So back up to the like moving that direction. So even when I was on 600s, when MotoAmerica first came in, there was a class separation between stock 600 and what they called super sport. And there was a year where it was like Gagne, Westby, Boubier, like all the top tier guys were in super sport, and then like the stock 600 class was kind of the more entry level guys. Most of those guys moved out of the 600 class and into the big bike class, and I don't think they had a lot of entries for super sport. So MotoAmerica made it where there was purse money, good purse money in super sport. So I basically went racing in super sport on a 600 super stock bike because I didn't have the budget to build an actual super sport bike, because as long as I finished where I needed to finish, I'm pretty much self-funded. The purse money funded my program.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward back to the moving on to the big bike, trying to chase the purse money on a 600. Not saying that you don't ride as hard on a big bike, but the way you have to ride a 600 to turn the lap times, everything is incredibly close to crashing all the time. And me being able to put together a engine that's going to be as fast as some top tier other 600s, that's really hard. Whereas stepping onto a stock ZX10, the bike already has more power than it has traction ability. So you're no longer trying to chase the power, more back to chasing the how much you can put to the ground and use it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And bigger guy, not having to spend money. Like, the first full season I did on the bike, it was a bone stock engine. The only reason I went into it the following seasons was to put new valve springs, more maintenance stuff than like improvement stuff. And my last year on 600, a buddy of mine asked me to do team challenge with him at Daytona on an R1. And it was my first time being on a big bike in like 5 or 6 years. When I was on a big bike prior to that, it was very intimidating. And that time actually going out on a big bike, it was kind of like, no, like, I think this will work out like really good. Because I could throw my weight around a little bit better. Like it seemed to work really, really good. And that's kind of what planted that seed. And then a phone call to the Mikes, Mike Fitzgerald, the guy that does all my chassis stuff, Thermos Man, and Mike Godin at KWS. I called them and I was like, hey, what do you guys think about me getting a big bike? And the two of them were, Fitz was, have you ever ridden another big bike? And I was like, no. And he was like, okay, cool. And I was like, oh, I don't like the way that sounds. And he's like, no, he's like, the ZX10 just, it steers a little different than the other ones. He's like, and if you're not already used to something else, he's like, you won't even notice the difference. And then when I called Godin about it, he was kind of the same thing. He was like, the amount of money it would cost you to build actual top level 6. He's like, and then just happening to get the correct parts to put like an actual legal stock motor together that is a proper motor. He's like, you're riding on the ragged edge to do what you're doing. And again, at the time, stock 1000, the talent pool wasn't wildly deep yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't even plan on doing Superbike. I forget who. I think it was my buddy Shane, I think, called me. And he's like, dude, are you going to be doing Superbike Cup? And I was like, what is Superbike Cup? I have no idea what that is. And he was like, as long as you make the qualifying time, he's like, do Superbike race and win the Superbike purse money. And I was just like, what's the purse money? And I went and like looked that up and I was like, yes, I'm going to do Superbike Cup. Being self-funded, like, it's just trying to win enough money to pay for my tires. That's, like the bike cost is what the bike cost is. Building the bike, thankfully, is something for the most part I can do. But, weekend to weekend, your biggest cost is tires. And the big bikes just eat tires. I used to be able to, like, on the super sport bike, I could get away with only 3 sets a weekend. I would show up and do qualifying and practice on an old set of tires. We'd put one new set of tires for one qualifier just to go out and try to throw down the best lap we could, and then a new set of tires for each race. Whereas the big bike, when you go out on used tires, it can screw your setup into the next one off, because when you finally do put new tires on, you might be going 10 or 15 miles an hour at a corner entry that you weren't doing before because you physically didn't have the drive grip to get down that straightaway that when you were using the used tires.
Yeah, that's insane. And so I'm wondering, like, how difficult is it, and like what's the process, when you went from amateur to pro? And how did you, decide, I'm ready for this?
So doing weird stuff, every once in a while, we would get really lucky and the legit pros would show up. First time actually getting to race with a pro rider, it was a guy by the name Huntley Nash. He came to Atlanta, and I was having a really good weekend. Him and I went toe to toe for a couple laps. In his head, he was probably, like, in hindsight, he was probably just trying to avoid me. Like, this guy's going to run into me because he's sketchy. But him and I went back and forth. He would go to pass me on the brakes, and like I'd look over and just let off the brake lever and carve it into the corner. And that was kind of like the first, like, that was a pro rider, and like he was right there with me. Another time at Barber, James Rispoli and Corey Alexander, I think they were on Jordan Suzuki's, and Joe Roberts.
The other Joe.
He was
The
on
other Joe.
he was on CBR 600. So I was really interested to watch him because he was basically riding the bike I was riding. And it was super cool to get to race with him that weekend, because every time they buzzed by me, it was just like a mental note, like I'm going way too slow here, or I'm going way too slow there. Like I want to say at the time I was maybe turning 33s and 34s at Barber. And the next time I went back, kind of all those like mental notes of like push harder here, push harder there, I was in like the 31s and 32s. Like it gained me or dropped me, a second and a half, 2 seconds a lap, just being able to watch them. And then also on that same weekend, I think at the end of the day, me and Corey had a pretty fun little battle for like 3 or 4 laps where we were just going back and forth. And he had finally, we caught up to a lapper, and he put a lapper between us where like I lost touch with him. But like that was my point of like, I never wanted to be the guy that like just made the cutoff, who's going to be in the way of the race. But when I started to kind of hold my own against some pretty like household names, I was like, all right, like I don't think I'll be a back marker. I think this is worth trying, and I think there's going to be a lot to learn. And I don't remember what year that was. I think that was 2013. Yeah, it was 2013. And 2014, me and this guy that I started to travel with, his name was Andy White. He was racing a big bike. He was actually racing a ZX10. And I had moved from the Honda platform to a Yamaha R6. And basically when we started traveling together, we agreed to do our first pro races together that year.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's a weird story. Andy actually passed that year. Like people don't like hearing that. It's stuff that happens. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks before at the time, AMA race at Barber. We were at a Weir race at Road Atlanta, and it was a get off at turn 5, and we all lost a pretty good dude. But man, you have no idea how much I wish he was around just so I could talk shit. He was such a shit talker. I used to threaten him. He would make fun of me for riding little scooter bikes, and I'd be like, I'm gonna go get a big bike, and I'm not gonna have to touch the motor because I don't weigh anything. We'd be in a group text, and then he'd text me after, like, but just me and him. He'd be like, being serious? And it's like, nah, man, I'm just messing with you.
Man, yeah, I hate to hear that,
man.
but yeah, if he's rolling with you, he's a fast dude, good fast dude.
Yeah, that was a wild couple weeks, man. It was had to go to a funeral, had to finish prepping like my first like pro bike. Got to the track, had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what technical inspection was going to be like. Like I literally got like Dickie shirts, and I sewed all the patches on the shirts myself. Like I feel so bad for all my friends that came to help me that weekend, because the shirts were anything but breathable, and it was wildly hot, like and everybody that was like, we'll totally come help at other weekends, just not in those shirts.
Yeah.
I had built my very first full R6 engine just before that round, and Huey of Marietta Motorsports, he was sponsoring us that year. So like I got the motor in the bike. We were basically going to Huey's shop to get it on the dyno, to do the tune before we actually went to Barber, and we get it on the dyno. and it makes 10 horsepower less than my stock bike.
What?
But we didn't have enough time. We didn't have enough time to like change anything, and it was just like, all right, man, like it is what it is. We're going with it. We're rolling with it. And I think at that time they were only 2-day events. Like there was no Friday practice and qualifying. It was like Saturday morning P1 and Q1, and like then you went into the races, and like that's what it was.
Yeah.
So the first day I did on the crap motor, and anyone going from club level that wants to getting into the pro level stuff, go to the gym, work out. Back in my day in Wira, we had these things called solo 20s, where it was a 20-lap race or whatever it was. And I mean, like, they were long and grueling. Practice those, do the longer races. When I got the halfway flag in that first race, I wanted to get off the bike and just be like, are you shitting me? I was
Endurance racing at
so
that point.
mentally and physically exhausted. It hurt my feelings though that was only the halfway point. Finished the race. Like, I can't even tell you where we finished. The lap times weren't that great. This is really funny. I don't know which one of the Wymans it was. I don't know if it was Travis.
Kyle,
I don't know if it was
Cody.
Kyle. I don't know if it was Cody. I remember seeing Wyman on the back of the leathers, and I was like, me and this dude going back and forth the whole race. And I was just like, I know that name. Like, that's a legit name. Like, this is a big deal. And I remember that night, like, we finished the race. That was the other thing, like, coming in after the race. When I did club level, there was this guy, Giannotto, that was not a shy guy. I have never had so many close quarter battles, elbows, handlebars. I mean, like, the phrase rubbing racing, that was this guy. When I did the first pro race, I came in with black marks all over my shoulders and elbows. And all my guys were like, did you fall down? Like, what the hell happened? It was just like, no, man, like, that's how many wheels were being shoved into every corner. It was like, you would get into the corner and just be rubbing up against somebody's front wheel. Like, it was the craziest thing in the world. So that night, we decided to drop my crappy motor out of the bike and toss the stock motor in. And we got it in that night, got it running. The next morning, went out on the same tires as we raced on the day before. And I was like a second and a half faster on the same tires. And it was just like, all right, like, we actually have some power. Went out in that race, struggled mentally the first couple laps before I kind of like was like, all right, like, we got to do this, and put my head down and just clawed my way back. And I'm pretty sure I was in the top 15. And it was like a month or two later that I got a random check in the mail. And I was like, what the hell is this? And I had to like call a buddy. I was like, hey, I got a check from AMA. And they're like, well, that's purse money. I didn't know about purse money yet. And I was like, what the hell is that? And they're like, you place good, you get money. And it was like, are you serious? And it was just like, all right, like, this is something I'm about. So that was the beginning of it. And yeah. I apologize. I bounce all over the place. I know you guys have questions. Please ask questions. And
Dude,
as
this is
my buddy
perfect.
Joe's wife would say, herding cats. I have so many stories and so many crazy things that have happened over the years. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's all good. And
I'm
so
looking at my
coming-
notes here, and it's like, oh, we didn't even ask that, but you already answered it. We already got that. Like, no, you're nailing it.
Yeah, you're killing it, man. And I guess so. Coming from that first race to now, so you've had a top 10 finish in Superbike too, right? Do you remember that day at all?
No, I I think in Superbike, I think my best is either an 11th or 12th. We'll call it fortune, where maybe a lot of the really fast guys struggled with gravity and physics a little bit, and it kind of helped me move my way forward a little bit. Like my bike, the bike that I race on is a stock 1000 bike. It's not, I compete in Superbike, but it's not a legit Superbike by a long shot. It's all the normal parts that you can buy from any of the vendors. I mean, Thermos Man does his own little black magic stuff in the forks and shocks for me. But for the most part, it's a really unmodified bike. That's the really nice thing about the big bikes, is back to they already make so much power. It's not really a lot of power. It's when you bring up the big teams, and it's like, oh, they have so much money. Even if you had all the money in the world to throw the best parts at any one motorcycle, the most important thing, and this is something that I've struggled with, is having the people around you that know how to extract those things from those parts. Like the ZX10, it's the first motorcycle I've ever had that has electronics. I have a very rudimentary understanding of how they're used. I don't use them the way probably a lot of the bigger teams use them. I don't even know if the electronics on my bike would operate in the way, like, oh boy, we'll get really nerdy. So the electronics on my bike, wheel spin and slide has to occur. Like, it happens. So like, you'll be going through a corner, the bike will start to slide, and it'll go past a certain threshold, and the electronics will go in to rein that back in, which will make the bike, kind of straighten back out. But what then happens often is you get like a stick slip condition where the chassis is loading, sliding, unloading, electronics stepping back in, and it makes the bike get really unruly and crazy. I've had some very unique perspectives of, like, let's say turn one at MotoAmerica, where I crashed, but I got a really good viewing spot to watch the legit Superbikes come through. The way it appears to me that they get the electronics and chassis to work together, where my electronics are kind of on or off, theirs are like a dimmer switch. They can come into a corner, and as the bike starts to slide, you can hear the electronics phase in and phase out. And never mind that just making the bike hook up and drive better. You can watch the chassis, and the chassis is just perfectly level across the pavement. It's not bucking, it's not sawing, like, it just makes it look like it just floats through the corner. And all of that floating is what equates to time. Have you ever been into drag racing of any kind?
Not officially, unofficially, of course.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I built little Honda race cars, little 4-cylinder Honda race cars, and was super awesome at drag racing front wheel drive cars, because that's what you do when you're a kid. And when you go to the drag strip, one of the most important things in doing a really, really good time is your 60-foot.
Yeah.
When I'm on my bike and I get to exit a corner with the legit super bikes, we're kind of coming out of a dig, coming out of a hole. The way their electronics, it's a multitude of things, but the way their bike is able to produce grip the way that mine does not, equates to that initial 60-foot jump. Once we're up to speed and going, they're only like marginally faster in a straight line than my stock bike. But the way it does everything from that slowest point in the corner, we'll just call it, to the 60 feet out of the corner, the amount of distance that they open just in that short time frame, every corner. You go to a track, let's say that's 3/10. You've got, I'm terrible at math, 10 corners. That's 3 seconds.
Yeah. And you're doing that
It's
every lap.
and they're able to do stuff like that lap after lap after lap. But again, they have the crew of guys that are able to look at it, manipulate the chassis and electronics together so that they actually work together. Probably a rider coach to a degree. Again, I don't know what actually goes on in the big teams, but just seeing what I see on track, it's really wild what the proper superbikes can do.
Do you know if because say like in MotoGP, for example, they have like the ECUs that are like tapped into the GPS, and then they're able to make changes in specific corners and things like that. Have you heard of anyone using stuff like that in a moto, or is that like illegal tech, or too far out?
Well, see, like, so with the first year we raced Stock 1000, I think me and my buddy, we were on our way home from Indianapolis. We were like, hey man, how much are the Superbike electronics? We wanted to see, like, just seeing how well they worked. It was like, what would it actually cost to build, a Superbike?
Yeah.
The computer was like 10 grand. So I don't know the like finite part, like little rules and designations for what is allowed, but like they do have like you're only allowed this software version, and when you have that software version, it's only going to give you certain parameters. I don't know what that has in regards to MotoAmerica, but I have heard about what they do in GP with that stuff, but I don't know what the rules are for MotoAmerica for that.
I'm pretty sure I've heard in the what the heck is it called, that MotoAmerica like TV series behind the scenes thing, like
Yeah.
whatever it's called, I can't remember. I'm pretty sure I've heard the Attack guys and even the Westby guys talking about how they could adjust engine braking in different corners.
Yeah.
So they didn't have just a set level for the whole track. They could adjust it corner by corner. So, Schultz would come in and be like, hey, it's out of control into 2. And they'd be like, all right, dial down the engine braking into 2. So I think they've got some pretty damn trick stuff going on in there.
Okay. I've heard it done 2 ways. In regards to MotoGP, like, again, like this is stuff that I read years ago. I have no idea what they're currently doing, but they could do it GPS wise, or they could also do it timing wise. And the problem with GPS is, like, have you ever sat in a stationary and looked at a GPS? Like, it'll show you 3 miles an hour and your position will kind of move around. So GPS is kind of inconsistent. What they'll do is they'll run a timer, and it resets every time they go over start finish, because it knows that between here and here they should be going into this corner, and then at this point they should be going into that corner. Do you remember the race Valentino Rossi and Casey Stoner at Laguna, where Rossi just kept stuffing them and stuffing them and stuffing them and stuffing them?
Mm-hmm.
What he was doing was he was screwing up the timing to the electronics on the bike.
Okay.
So that
Wow.
it wouldn't react the way that it was supposed to, because he wasn't in the places he was supposed to be when it was supposed to run at a certain setting. So, like, I've heard that's more consistent than the GPS thing. But that's well beyond my means.
We've heard
or
with the
comprehension.
GPS stuff.
That's well behind.
Yeah, that like a rider will high side or something like that, and they'll come back and they'll go, it turns out the GPS was lost, so the bike thought they were in turn 8 or whatever and gave them 2 clicks of traction control when they were actually in turn 7 and they needed 8 clicks or whatever. So yeah, that GPS has some problems too.
Yeah, that's insane, but I guess I find comfort in the fact that you really can't just take a freaking production bike out of the dealership, right? And then you can go race at the professional level with that thing after put a little bit of money into it, of course, but you can still take a mostly bought bike, right, and make it competitive. So it's not all BS coming from the
There,
manufacturers, right?
no,
Yeah.
no, like that's
Yeah.
um. So unlike the electronics and like that kind of stuff, the ZX10, like I said, was my first bike with electronics. Um, you can play with engine braking electronically, not corner specific, but you can go in and play with a lot of the different settings within it. You can play with the ETV maps. That's most of the motorcycles are dumbed down. Like what you ask for at the grip is not what the actual
Yeah.
throttle bodies do. It
Mhm.
was something that I actually struggled with a little bit when I first got on the ZX10 because I'd be mid corner and have the thing almost at full grip because the throttle bodies were so dumbed down that I was waiting on the
Hmm.
bike hour. Like it kind of like was like I shouldn't be waiting on a 1000. And Godin spent some time with me to kind of explain how everything worked, and we went back into the electronics and made it more one to one,
Yeah. Yeah.
which didn't dumb it down. It makes it a handful to manipulate, but when you want something and you want it, I got to ride a buddy of mine in 2022. I wasn't going to be racing much. I had a lot of big projects to try to make racing better for 2023 for me to get done in 2022. But I was going to a couple rounds with Luis and Dejas to help him be a crew member for him. And he started the season out on a Honda. You have no idea how disappointed I am. I really wish I would have been able to ride that bike and see what that bike was like.
Yeah. That SP
Um,
he had was
at
a
the end of
pretty
the
bike.
season, oh my goodness, I would have loved to have tried one just to see what it was like. Um, honestly, if I had the things would have worked out better last year, there could have been a really high probability I would have been on one of those for this year. That's a different story. So towards the end of the year, we were coming up on the round at Barber, and I was trying to make arrangements with work, and I was like, "Hey, man, like, how are we looking for Barber?" I knew that he had gotten a BMW, one of the Alpha
Hmm.
bikes, and he was like, I got too much stuff going on with work, and I was like, like that's a bummer, and I was like, all right, so I basically think I'm going to be filling my schedule back up with work at the shop, and like the next day he goes, "Hey, man, will you ride the BMW with Barber?" And I thought he was like messing with me, and I was like, "Man, get out of here!" Like, and he's like, "No, no, no, seriously." He's like, I would really like to." And he's like, I really appreciate you coming to help and everything this year. And he's like, I know you haven't gotten to do anything. And I was just like, oh man, like you're being serious right now. And he was like, yeah, yeah. I was just like, I wanted to say yes so bad, but I mean, like that's a pretty crazy piece of machinery. I think I had done one track day at Road Atlanta and one Wira weekend at Road Atlanta that entire year. I wasn't training. I was eating way too many cookies. Um, I I had it like I was like I was like, hey man, like I would love to do it. I was like, but only if we can find a track day weekend somewhere. I think we had one weekend before the MotoAmerica event. I was like, I've never turned a wheel on the bike ever. The idea of going to a pro race and not looking like a total idiot on a bike I've never ridden before, like, and I haven't, like, I wasn't sharp because I wasn't riding. Um,
Yeah.
so we wound up finding a track day at VIR and packed up. Our buddy Daniel Goodnight, he came out to VIR. I actually got to Daniel's house and we kind of had to finish prepping everything on the bike, like all the safety wire, the rain light, just like little odds and ends that we needed to finish up on the bike. And I got to VIR on like 3 hours of sleep and we rolled the bike off and like it was a Dude, it was a bad bike, man. Bad bike. One of the strangest feeling bikes I've ever ridden. So again, like no sleep, and like when Daniel was with me, I was like, listen, when I come in, like if I'm talking and like complaining or griping, ignore me for like the first session or so, because like my brain's gonna be slow and I'm just gonna talk to myself a bunch. So I go out and like we were sent a I don't know all the details, but like BMW kind of has like a program that if you race one of their bikes, you like send your data to this dude Steve Weir. Steve, I'm gonna mispronounce his name. This guy Steve, super awesome, super nice, wildly well versed and knowledge in all of the little black magic that goes along with those things. Um, so anyway, he sent us like a base file to start out on the bike, and I go out on track and like I get the bike into a corner and I just like start giving it throttle, and like it feels like there's nothing there. Like I just get on the edge of the tire and I'm just like, where is it? Like I almost have to re-grip in the middle of a corner to give it throttle to actually get it to like start to respond. And I come in and I tell Daniel, I'm like, dude, it's so weird. I was like, it feels like numb, like it feels like it's disconnected. Like I can't get the motor to do anything. So I go out and ride it one more session, and he was like, when you get in the corner, he's like, listen for the exhaust, and he's like, listen for a crackle, and he's like, if it's a crackle, he's like, you're already leaning on the electronics. And I go out and like I start to do it, and I'm like, oh, it's totally the electronics. Like come in, and I'm like, that's way too much. Like give me more. So we send the data off to Steve. He goes in and like manipulates all this stuff, and he sends it back, and I go back out, and it's kind of still the same. This time my brain's working a lot better, and there's this one long right-hander that on a big bike, because they don't turn very well, one of the ways you can get them to turn is you put them on their side and get on the throttle, and it will make the rear slide and point the nose where you need the nose to point. I couldn't do that with the bike because the electronics were reining it in. I would put the bike on its side, and I could really like a screwdriver with the throttle tube, and the bike would just sit there. And it was just like, this shouldn't work. Like I went an analog bike to a very digital bike. I got to talk to Steve on the phone and kind of explain everything. And he was like, oh, okay. And he's like, I'm going to send you a different file. And like, Steve had no idea who I was. I didn't really know who Steve was. So I imagine when they kind of go through this process, it's a little more in reserve until they go, oh, okay, like you can kind of ride. So like, here's the real deal stuff. So he sends one with way less traction control. So now I can actually go out and get this thing to start sliding the way that I want it to slide. I'm kind of trying to figure out how the front end feels. Getting on the brakes, it was a little weird. It was all setup stuff. Towards kind of the tail end of the day, I think it was still neutered electronically, like overall power. And I think he had finally sent us like the full boat map where it had full power. So I've been riding all day with less power. So I have all of these, like people talk about brake markers. I try to not use the term brake marker. I try to use the term rollout marker. I do not shut the throttle until this point. So we get an updated map. I go out on track and I go for my first flying lap. And I go on a turn one and I grab the brakes. And when I grab the brakes and get into the markers, I realize I am going way faster than I was any session before. I think I cleared turn one by 30 feet out into the grass.
Oh, wow.
It was just like, okay, like we got to back that marker up a little bit because the bike was so much faster down the straightaway. I physically didn't have enough room to slow it down going into turn one. And it was just like, hey, man, in the future, give me everything. Don't ever give me less and then give me more. Let me have it all. And if it's too much, we'll back it back down because, like, imagine if there was somebody in front. I would have
Yeah.
engaged a little bit differently, but here's a short tangent. A long time ago, I got to meet Josh Hayes after hours at a club race when I was a novice. He actually gave me some geometry setups on the CBR that is what I think really allowed that bike and myself to like shine together. But in that same conversation, he was like, yeah, man, he's like, you know, you just go into a corner until he's like, you go into a corner until you blow it. And he goes, and then you find that point of like, that's too much and back it up a couple feet. And it was like, at the time, it was just like, you're freaking nuts, man. Like, that's insane to think that way. And now I go somewhere, I'll go out and put some pretty aggressive laps in, but then I will go out with intentions on blowing corners to figure out just how hot I can get in. And when it's too much, I overshoot. And it's like, all right, like I just need to back it up a couple feet from there. It gets rid of all of that panic that happens because you've already overshot it once and you gathered it up and saved it. So now when you go full tilt to that mark just a hair before, it doesn't even register. And it's just a way faster way to get up to pace. Within reason. Like when people say like, oh, full send it, like it's always full send, but like with some self-preservation.
Yeah.
Not full send it, send the bike home in a box and you in a cast. That's not the way to say it. I can vouch for that. So back to the BMW. We get the bike kind of like, there were some things I was still looking for from it that I was like, I don't like the way the front end feels when I'm on the brakes. I want to say we got into like the 31s at VIR, which we were on takeoffs all day. Like it wasn't any new tires or anything. And I got the one day there and then we got to go to Barber. Yeah, it was a handful, man. Like the ZX10 is pretty quick. The BMW, when I'm on the ZX10, I know I cannot pass BMWs. I know that I just got to sit in their draft and wait and time it right and hope I can outbrake them into the corner because there is no passing the BMW on straightaway. We get to Barber. The other crazy thing about the BMW is it has so many adjustment points. Like there's a swing arm pivot point that's adjustable. There's a linkage pivot point that's adjustable. Like if you don't have the right person like helping you, like you could go down a wild road on this if you had to do it all on your own. So like Steve gave us like a setup for it, and I mean right off the rip we were moving, man. And every time I go out, like immediately it was 28s, 27s, and it was just like, holy cow, we're making little changes here and there. The bike still wasn't happy. I was having a lot of issues with pumping from the rear, and it was a combination of the shock settings and the electronic settings. The BMW, when you get on it, it really sinks into the rear like ride height. Like it really just sinks into the stroke of the shock. And that's one of the ways like it gets, I couldn't believe how much grip it had and how much it didn't wheel.
Yeah.
The ZX10, my front wheels never on the ground. The BMW, it would bite and the front wheel would just barely come off the ground. Like that was phenomenal. But then what would happen is a slide would occur and it would unload. The electronics would rein it back in. I mean, just the straightaways at Barber exiting turn 5, going all the way up towards the museum corner. I'm just all the way down that straightaway, which is wildly physically demanding because the bike's just doing this the whole time. And it's just like, don't let it get away from you. Don't let it get away from you. Stay loose, but also don't let it get away from you. Yeah. And I was out. Taylor Knapp came out in front of me, and Taylor, like, again, like, over the years, it's like some of the like really real deal guys' names have kind of just been getting closer and closer and closer to them. It's crazy to me. Like, I'm way too old to be doing this. I'm going to be 40 this year. I didn't grow up doing this. I haven't had much training. I've wanted it really, really bad. And I really, really love riding.
Yeah.
So Taylor comes out in front of me and I'm just like, oh, this is the carrot I need to chase. He's on a BMW, so I'm not really going to be in a deficit of anything. Should be on pretty even footing. And immediately he starts putting in rippers. And I'm trying to follow him. And it's like 122, 127.1, 126.9. The first time I ever did a 27, my brain exploded. On my ZX10 the year before. I couldn't believe that I did a 127 at Barber. 26.9. I touched a 126 at Barber. Like, I was immediately I was like, Louis is gonna be so fucking stoked right now. We caught up to some lappers, and I was like, all right, like let me regather this, like, because I think we still have a good couple laps in the rear tire that we had on the bike. And we get some clear track. So Taylor takes off. I let him run out a little bit, and then I'm just like, I'm going to make sure I'm closing. So I get going on this ripper of a lap. I'm closing. I don't remember where I caught her. I think it was in the last section where you come up and over the hill and down around. And to the guy, and I was just like, well, there goes that lap. And I kind of like chilled it out, went around him, I come around start finish. And when I went across start, that lap with me rolling out was a 26.9. And it was just like, that could have been a low 26 with the amount of rollout I had, at least half a second. And it was just like, this bike is wild. It would have been awesome to spend more time on something like that, like to not have any experience on it and go ride it. It was super awesome and super fun, until I may have been cleaned out by somebody on Sunday. Somebody came in a little too hot behind me and clipped me in the shoulder.
It looks like maybe one of the M4 bikes, Greg, maybe Jake Lewis there in 6th.
And it's the 45 who's in the lead around Jake Gagne. Jason, we haven't seen this too much this season.
No, but Camp's been really...
we got riders down to the back.
Maybe riders. It looked like more than one. Is it just one, Greg? It is just one. Have a look and see who that is.
48?
Yeah, is that Joe Giannotto, isn't it?
Yeah, Joe Giannotto on his BMW down. But we have Cameron Peterson leading the way. And
I had a total panic attack that I just crashed Louis' wildly expensive bike, and thankfully was like at minimal damage on the bike. Oh my god, I was so thankful for that.
You were running pretty high up in that race too, weren't you? If I remember correctly.
No. To be totally honest, that weekend, the stock 1000 in 2022, the talent field was deep, man. There were some really fast guys that year. And then even in Superbike, like, we weren't far from last. Like, I was, again, back to me in like the right physical shape. Like, you really do have to train for those races. It is no joke to try to turn laps at that pace, that consistently for that long, to try to just show up and wing it. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
At least for a mortal. Like, it's hard. It's really hard. Fast forward to 2020.
Oh, I was just going to say, how do you train real quick, by the way?
I'll probably totally get made fun of for like admitting this. So I go to a gym that it's like a toned down version of CrossFit. It's called Orange Theory. There's a lot of
That's the
cardio,
secret.
a lot of rowing, a lot of core stuff, and like their classes, man. It's like a group training session. I try to do that 2 to 3 days a week. On the weekends, I usually do some fun stuff, whether it be a dirt bike, a mountain bike. I really do need to put some more work in on a pedal bike. I should have started this back in December. I've just been so busy with work and stuff. But yeah, like the physical training, that's one of the things that when I started racing pro and I actually started going to the gym and doing that, it was dramatic. I remember 2014 was my year. 2015, I think that was the first year MotoAmerica became MotoAmerica. I remember when I went to the first race, I didn't realize I had fat face when I was like 29, 30. I started training and I went to the first race and somebody was like, what the hell have you been doing in the off season, man? And you look like you're like 30 pounds lighter. And it's like, no, man, I'm maybe like 10 pounds lighter. They're like, you just look way thinner in the face. And it's like, oh, because I'm actually like in shape now. It makes
Not
such
eating those
dramatic
cookies.
change on the bike. It makes, oh, dude, that's my Achilles heel. I love chocolate chip cookies. Like Publix, you guys are in Florida. You know what Publix chocolate chip cookies are like.
Yeah, we
They
know
may as
about
well be
Publix,
cracked.
man. Brownies are pretty good too. Man,
Which
well,
ones?
I said the brownies are pretty good too, man. Pretty much everything.
Don't tell
In the
him that.
bakery
Don't
out of
tell him
Publix.
that.
Pretty much everything, but yeah.
No, like I'm once gosh, sound like an addict. Once I get in, man, I'm pretty good about staying away from it. Like I crave it less and less and less. But yeah, it's
Sweet.
just trying not to eat garbage and trying to stay active. Like when I did primarily club stuff, my occupation is very physical. I'm an automotive mechanic by trade, and it's a very physical job. And that kind of skirted me by. But then going from club level to pro level, like the real deal guys don't mess around, man. Like they are proper athletes. Like
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
guy who goes to a gym and eats cookies.
Sweet. Well, man, we don't want to keep you here all night, Joe, but I mean, we can obviously keep this thing going like till 6 a.m., bro. I mean, your stories are so cool, man, and freaking just hearing about the bikes and everything, it's amazing. But like I said, we won't keep you here all night. But real quick, so Andy from our Florida Moto Talk Facebook page, he had a question for you, and Andy asked, he says that he's always curious to know how riders nowadays are getting so fast at such a young age, and he wanted to know what you would recommend for us. We are all included in this, but for us back markers to improve our riding. So, what any tips for us normal Joes to improve our riding and become Super Joe?
Well, like I had mentioned, like I didn't really start riding until I was older, but like we talked about the bike thing earlier. I don't know who said it, but the greats are great because they spend their time at their thing. Like they spend lots of time doing their thing. Um, I mentioned the dirt bike earlier. What I didn't mention was that I would go to work all day. I would come home, and regardless of what time of day it was, I would go out and spend an hour and a half, 2 hours flogging that thing through the woods every
Mhm.
day. You look at the real deal pros on their social media. What are they doing every day? They're riding a dirt bike,
Yeah.
riding a flat track bike. They're riding this. Just and then the other thing is don't confuse that with just mindless riding. I've always thought that you're your own best critic. If you're into this, chances are you've read books, you've watched some of the like the Twist the Wrist DVD, like you kind of
Mhm.
understand how things are supposed to be done.
Mhm.
You're going to kind of know what you're doing wrong. Don't just go out and ride mindlessly. Be very cognitive about what you're doing, and always kind of just be working on stuff. While you're working on that stuff, you'll be desensitizing yourself, slowly becoming that motorcycle sociopath. Just
Yeah.
spend the time riding thoughtfully.
Sweet.
I
Yeah,
mean,
great
that's also
advice.
back to the little kids. That's what they do, is they get to play. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. Like, so many guys that I've met, like, they train and they do this and this and this. Have fun. Do all that stuff. Make sure you're actually having fun, because it's a whole lot of money to go in to not be having fun.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, great, man. And just real quick, for anybody that wants to help you out, support your program, or just follow you in general, where can we send them? Are you on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that?
Instagram would be like the more funny stuff and like race stuff. I'm not out searching for help or anything like that, but if you want to see some funny, super hole in the wall race team do some silly stuff sometimes against the big teams, I think it's Limitless 484 on Instagram, I believe, or
Yeah, we'll
shenanigans of me working on stuff at work.
sweet. Yeah, we'll get the links and definitely drop them down in the description so people can follow your journey and keep up with you, man. And thanks for coming on with us. Like I said, we could talk to you all night, but I'm sure you got other things to do. But yeah, just thanks for taking the time to come join us here, man, and answer questions and just drop all this knowledge on us and just tell us we need to go buy dirt bikes and spend more money on motorcycles.
Yeah. Look, sweetie, Joe
Oh, I'm sorry, it
said
was
I
all
had
scattered,
Joe said
man.
so. Joe said so. I gotta. But yeah, man, that's all I got, man. You got anything, Tristan?
Oh, I mean, this worked out great. This was all a secret plot to make Joe a scapegoat for all of my poor decision making, and
It
yeah,
worked.
it's worked out perfectly. So thank you very much, and you'll be probably hearing from my wife and her attorneys at some point.
Getting sued. Well, yeah, thanks, man. Thanks everybody for tuning
uh,
in. Yeah, thanks everybody
I
for
had a
joining
blast,
us.
guys. Thank you.
Yep, and we'll have you back
If you
on
ever want to hear
anytime.
more stories, I'm totally open to it, man.
Anytime. But yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you, guys.
Yep, thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right.
See ya.
Have a good night.